Imagine turning on your television in the early 1990s. You are watching the evening news, everything looks normal, and then the news ends. Instead of a commercial, another program appears. There is no presenter, no studio, no conversation, just a photograph of a person, their full name, the years they were born and died, and information about their life. The person in the photograph is dead, and you're watching their obituary on television. This wasn't a horror movie. It was called Tsarstvo Nebesnoe, or the Kingdom of Heaven. The program is associated with Altai television in Barnaul, Russia, and is generally dated to the early 1990s. What made it so unusual was its format. Instead of a traditional funeral announcement in a newspaper, information about the deceased was presented directly on television. For people watching at the time, it was simply part of the local broadcast. But decades later, almost nothing from the program could be found. And that's where the story becomes strange. The internet began filling with memories of the program. People described seeing photographs of deceased people appear on their television screens. They remembered the dark presentation. They remembered the names. They remembered the feeling of watching something that seemed completely different from everything else on television. But memories aren't proof. For years, there was no easily accessible recording that could settle the question. Did this program actually exist? Or had an old television memory slowly turned into an internet legend? Then something happened. In 2021, an old recording of Altai television was digitized. The recording came from May 1994, and inside it was a tiny fragment, only around 15 seconds. But those few seconds showed exactly what people had been talking about. The screen contained an obituary for a woman named Olga Pozharskaya. Suddenly, there was physical evidence that this strange television material was not simply something somebody had invented on the internet. A fragment really existed, and you can imagine what happened next. People immediately wanted to know more. If one fragment had survived, where was the rest? Maybe even dozens of hours of material, but almost none of it could be found. But there is a problem. In 2017, a user on the Russian website 4Store, Ru created the entire story about the Kingdom of Heaven. The person presented it as a forgotten Soviet television program and invented the details surrounding it, but there was an even stranger part. The supposed obituary records contained the names of people who were actually real living people, except their identities had been altered. The creator took real people and gave them completely different invented names, presenting them as if they were people who had appeared in these fictional obituaries. So the story wasn't based on a real Soviet archive. It was constructed from invented details, fabricated identities, and a fictional history. The supposed footage was later treated as proof that the program had existed, when in reality the story itself had originated as a fictional post on 4Store. Ru in 2017. And that's how a made-up story turned into what looked like genuine lost media. People kept reposting it, adding new details and treating the supposed evidence as authentic, until the original story was traced back to its source. What looked like a disturbing piece of forgotten Soviet television was actually an internet hoax, one that became convincing simply because people kept repeating it. The Blue Whale and the Quiet House. By 2016, something disturbing was spreading through the Russian-speaking internet. It started with groups on VK communities filled with dark images, depressive posts, and messages aimed at vulnerable teenagers. Then came two names, Blue Whale and Quiet House. The idea was presented as a game. A teenager would contact an anonymous curator and receive a series of tasks. At first, the tasks could appear harmless, but they gradually became more dangerous, with the curator demanding increasingly serious acts of self-harm. And the most disturbing part was the final goal. The participant was being pushed towards suicide. The curator wasn't necessarily some mysterious hacker hiding in a basement. Sometimes it was simply another person operating an anonymous social media account. And that person could communicate directly with a teenager, gain their trust, threaten them, manipulate them, and make them believe there was no way out. In 2017, Russian investigators began treating some of these cases as real criminal investigations. One case in the Krasnodar region involved an 11-year-old girl who, according to investigators, had been contacted through a group associated with Blue Whale. The alleged organizer gave her dangerous instructions and later threatened her family when she refused. This was no longer just an internet rumor. there were real victims. There were real investigations, and there were real people behind at least some of these groups. But then the story became much more complicated. Russian media began reporting that the blue whale phenomenon had caused a huge number of teenage deaths. The number of alleged victims grew rapidly. The phrase appeared everywhere. Television, newspapers, parents were terrified, schools began warning students, and suddenly, millions of people were searching for something they had never heard of a few months earlier. This created a terrifying feedback loop. The more the media talked about the game, the more teenagers learned that these communities existed, the more people searched for them. The more fake groups, copycats, and hoaxes appeared, and the internet began mixing several completely different things together. Real dangerous communities, copycat accounts, fake screenshots, ordinary depressive communities, and sensational stories that had never been properly verified. That's why the history of Blue Whale is so difficult to reconstruct. Some of the danger was real, but the enormous claim that hundreds of teenage deaths were all caused by one organized game was never established as fact. The result was something almost as strange as the original phenomenon. A real online danger became surrounded by an enormous layer of internet mythology, and Quiet House became part of that mythology. The phrase had existed in Russian internet culture before the 2017 panic, but during the Blue Whale hysteria, it became associated with the idea of a hidden online world where dangerous communities operated. Posts disappeared, groups were deleted, screenshots were reposted, people created fake accounts pretending to be curators. And years later, researchers were left trying to determine which pieces belonged to the original phenomenon, and which appeared only after the panic had already begun. So the story of Blue Whale isn't simply, an internet game caused teenagers to die. The real story is darker and much more complicated. There were genuine cases of online manipulation and criminal investigations. But around those cases, the internet created an entire mythology that became almost impossible to separate from the facts. And that is exactly why Blue Whale belongs in the history of the Russian internet. Because sometimes lost internet history isn't a missing video or a deleted website. Sometimes it's the original truth buried underneath years of screenshots, rumors, and reposts. In 2021, something bizarre started appearing on the streets of Moscow. People were taking photos of ordinary buildings, streets, and advertisements. But there was one detail that made these photographs completely different. The advertisements were promoting Hydra. Hydra was one of the largest Russian-language darknet marketplaces at the time, and now its name was appearing in public spaces across Moscow. The strange part was that this wasn't supposed to be possible. Hydra existed on the hidden side of the internet. It wasn't a normal online store. It wasn't something you would expect to see advertised on an ordinary city street. Yet suddenly people were photographing advertisements connected to it and posting the images online. The photographs spread across Russian social media. People were asking the same question: who was putting these advertisements everywhere? And why were they doing it so openly? At the time, Hydra had become an enormous part of the Russian-speaking darknet. It operated as a marketplace where illegal goods and services were offered anonymously. Its scale was so large that Russian law enforcement agencies and international investigators were paying increasing attention to it. But the Moscow advertisements showed something even stranger. The underground internet was no longer completely underground. Its advertising was appearing in the physical world. And every photograph of those advertisements created another copy on the internet. Someone would see one on a street, take a picture, post it online. Another person would save the picture. Someone else would use it in a news report. And suddenly, even if the original advertisement disappeared, its image continued circulating. This is what makes the Hydra advertising story so interesting as a piece of Russian internet history. The original marketplace eventually disappeared too. In April 2022, German authorities announced that they had seized Hydra's servers and shut down the marketplace. The site that had dominated the Russian-language darknet for years was suddenly gone, but the advertisements remained in photographs. The screenshots remained, the news reports remained, and the strange images of Hydra's presence in Moscow became part of the digital history of the Russian internet. A marketplace that had operated in the hidden corners of the web had briefly become visible to everyone, and then, just as quickly, it disappeared. but its traces didn't. They were already everywhere, on old screenshots, in archived articles, in photographs, and in the memories of people who had walked past them without ever expecting to see something from the darknet in the middle of Moscow. In 2013, Russian television viewers watching the children's channel Karusel suddenly saw something that absolutely did not belong there. It happened on March 12. The broadcast had been completely normal. Children's programming was playing, followed by a regular announcement for another show, and then the picture started to break apart. The signal became distorted. The normal broadcast disappeared, and something completely different appeared on the screen. The Karusel logo itself seemed to be corrupted. Instead of the familiar children's channel branding, viewers saw a distorted version of the logo accompanied by strange symbols. Then things became even stranger. The distorted logo appeared to move and behave in a bizarre way. For viewers watching at home, it looked nothing like a normal technical failure. It looked like someone had deliberately inserted something into the broadcast. And because Karusel was a children's channel, the contrast made the whole thing especially unsettling. One moment you were watching a normal children's program. The next, the screen was filled with something that looked completely out of place. People who recorded the incident later uploaded copies of the footage to the internet, and that's where the story really began. The recording started circulating as evidence of a supposed television hack. People wanted to know who had interrupted the channel. Why had they done it? And why had they chosen a children's television station? The strange sequence became known online as the Karusel incident because the distorted logo appeared to resemble a corrupted version of the word Karusel. But there was a problem. Nobody could conclusively prove that an actual hacker had broken into the national broadcast. The footage showed something unusual happening to the transmission. But a strange broadcast does not automatically mean that someone hacked the television station. It could have been a technical problem. It could have been an issue somewhere in the distribution chain, or it could have been something deliberately inserted into the signal. The exact explanation remained unclear. What is known is that the broadcast eventually returned to normal, and later the channel went into a period of technical maintenance. And that tiny piece of footage became part of Russian internet folklore. People started searching for other recordings. Some claimed that similar incidents had happened before. Others began creating completely fake Karusel hacks and uploading them as if they were real. This made the original incident even harder to investigate. Real footage and fake footage started mixing together. A genuine strange broadcast could be followed by a completely fabricated one. And years later, someone watching a compilation might have no idea which recording was original. That's what makes the Karusel incident perfect for a lost media story. The mystery isn't simply what appeared on the screen. It's the fact that after years of reposts, edits, and fake versions, it became difficult to separate the original recording from everything that came afterward. And there is something particularly unsettling about the footage itself. You don't see some dramatic hacker sitting in front of a computer. You don't see anyone explaining what happened. You simply see a children's television channel suddenly become something completely different. For a few moments, the normal broadcast is gone. Then it disappears. Yeru and the children's programming returns. If you had been watching at home that day, you would have had almost no way of knowing what had actually happened. Was it a technical failure? Was someone interfering with the signal, or was there another explanation? No definitive public answer has settled the mystery. And that uncertainty is exactly why the recording survived. It wasn't famous because it showed something incredibly violent or graphic. It was famous because it looked like something had gone wrong with reality itself. A children's channel, a corrupted logo, strange symbols, a sudden interruption, and then nothing. The broadcast continued as if nothing had happened, but somewhere online someone had recorded it. And years later, that recording became another strange fragment of Russian internet history.